People First Radio is a program about people, the society in which we live, and issues related to health and wellness.
Welcome to People First Radio. I'm Joe Pugh. A Victoria organization supporting sex workers has a pilot program to help those who don't have a strong grasp of the English language. Peers Victoria Resources Society has been around since 1995. The new program is just one of many efforts to support the safety and well-being of sex workers in the capital region. It helps those who speak Cantonese and Mandarin. I got in touch with the organization's executive director, as well as the person running the pilot program.
My name is Leigh, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Executive Director of Peers Victoria Resources Society. I've been with the organization for over 6 years now, and in this role for over 3, and I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you so much for having us on, Joe.
Hi, my name is Ray Ray. I'm the Community Support Coordinator for the Immigrant and Migrant Sex Worker, this community, and my pronouns is she, her. And also, I work here for 1 year, so I'm pretty new compared with Leigh. I'm also very happy to be here.
Well, thank you both very much for making some time to be here. Maybe before we dive into the program you've been helping out with specifically, Leigh, could you tell me a bit about what does Peers do?
That's a big question to answer, Joe. I'll try to do it as succinctly as possible. Peers Victoria has been in operation since 1995. So we actually just celebrated our 30th year anniversary last year. We're a by, for, and with organization for current and former sex workers. Basically, we're pretty grassroots, started out with being founded in 1995, and we've really evolved since then. We have a bunch of different programs that range from housing support to outreach to health. We have free counseling, just a bunch of different options to support current or former sex workers across Vancouver Island, although our primary focus, as some of our programs are physically limited to where we can physically deliver services, are what is known as Victoria on Esquimalt and Songhees lands. So I can go into depth about what programs we have to offer if you'd like that, or I could just try to bullet point it for you. Not sure.
Well, maybe a good way into that is, what are some of the things that sex workers in the area need help with?
That's a great question. So basically, sex workers in our area often can encounter stigma when accessing health and social support. So folks may not feel comfortable disclosing the work that they do, which can limit the sort of help that they're able to receive, or when they disclose the work that they do, they may experience stigma or discrimination from healthcare or social service supports. So it sort of limits them. So one thing that we do see is a lot of the people that come into our organization for support often don't access other health and social service supports. So we kind of are a bit of a catch-all to be able to provide those avenues for folks. So like I mentioned, we do have health services. We have a street outreach nurse that is at our organization, as well as in a lot of our outreach programs. We do offer free counseling. We can help folks find housing as well as maintain housing if they're, experiencing eviction. We do harm reduction work as well. So we have a night outreach van that goes to 2 different areas of the stroll where sex workers work, and we provide harm reduction in the form of condoms, lube, safer substance use supplies. So like, needles, pipes, etc. We also provide warm gear for when people are experiencing cold weather, tents, food, a hot meal. So we're sometimes the only organization people will encounter that day, or the only hot meal that they'll have. So in terms of what support sex workers need, there's a huge range depending on what other intersections folks experience. If they're unhoused, if they're substance users, if they're working indoors, for example, going to school or whatnot, then maybe the supports that they're looking for with us is just community, like finding other folks that are doing the work that they're doing and have a safe, open place to talk about that. Or perhaps it's violence prevention support, so accessing our bad date and aggressor report. So sex workers have a way of keeping each other safe by letting each other know if they've had a bad date. A bad date can range from anything from someone refusing to pay to aggravated assault and everything in between. So we kind of circulate this report to sex workers across Vancouver Island so that they're aware of people to avoid. And then people feel empowered by being able to share their stories and help keep their own community safe as well. So in terms of what support looks like for sex workers, we're very person-centered, where we meet people where they're at. And that can look like a wide range of things, whether that's just coming in for a community meal or whether that's going out and speaking with their landlord and advocating for them to be able to keep their housing.
And Ray, I understand that there's a growing population of people doing this work in the Victoria region who don't speak English. Is that correct?
Yes. And also because of the language barriers, this community, they are hard to access health resources and also social resources. So that's why we have this kind of new program in Peers, because we want to build the safe community for those population, because they cannot speak English very well, and sometimes they are immigration and they don't know like how to access the Canada's resources and information, so we can help them. Sometimes, for example, like in every Tuesday, we deliver health supplies for them, like free condoms, gloves, also lubes, to some harm reduction supplies for them. Also, we provide like culturally safe referrals for healthcare and also mental health support, including translation assistance. Like if they want to have some health test, they can come to Peers, and I will accompany with them to translate the English. Yeah.
And if I could just add on to that, one other barrier that this population is experiencing is that sometimes they're here, they're temporary residents. So they might be here on a work visa or a student visa. And if that's the case, they're actually legally not allowed to engage in sex work in Canada, according to the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. So that can be a barrier for them as well in accessing support, because they're afraid of being deported. So for example, like accessing safety resources, accessing safer sex supplies, accessing healthcare, and being able to also divulge the work that they do. So being able to connect with us, we don't ask people what their status is. We don't inquire about those particular pieces. We just, again, give them the supplies that they need or the connections that they need, and they are able to come in and access healthcare supports without having a healthcare card, and can use a fake name and all those pieces.
Well, on that front, Leigh, do you think there's anything else that's important for people to know about the legal framework that regulates sex work and how it impacts the people that you work with Peers?
Oh, Joe, don't get me started. That could be an entire conversation in itself. What I will say is that Peers is as a member of the Canadian Alliance for Sex Work Law Reform. We're currently involved in a constitutional challenge at this moment, actually, going to the Supreme Court of Canada to address the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act, which essentially are the sex work laws in Canada, as well as this Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, which has very racist laws towards immigrants doing sex work and in Canada. But essentially, the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act was set up after the Bedford trials. The Harper government set it up after that was successfully brought to the Supreme Court of Canada, Bedford versus Canada. They had a year to basically create new sex work laws. These were the laws that put in place. Essentially, it criminalizes everything about sex work except for sex work itself. So it's legal to do sex work, but it's not legal to buy. It's not legal to hire bodyguards, security, drivers, to work in an agency in terms of hiring like admin support. Advertising is illegal. So it actually creates more exploitation and violence for sex workers by not being able to have the resources to work safely. And it often prevents, it also creates more stigma for sex workers as well, because it's still this like criminalized industry. Where, it's often said, and like the defense about these laws is, well, it's legal to do it. So like, therefore we're not discriminating against sex workers themselves. However, it makes the work incredibly difficult. And there's lots of research that you can look at, even locally on Vancouver Island. Cecilia Benoit from UVic, Annalie Lepp, they do a lot of academic research and research across Canada, sort of showing the increase in exploitation once PACIPA, our short form for the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act, became law. So it is something that we are addressing at court. We do think that sex work is work, and people deserve to have safe working conditions to do that work, which includes hiring admin support, hiring drivers, being able to work together, being able to rent spaces, being able to advertise online, and to clearly communicate with clients what services they're offering, and clients being able to communicate back without fearing arrest. So that, people will often not communicate because they're afraid that it might result in divulging too much information, that resulting in them being charged.
Now, Ray, when you're working with people who are engaging in sex work and they don't speak English very well, how do you connect in the first place, and what is that like?
Like first, I will send them code text. So I will search them online, and if I find like, oh, maybe this a number I can connect with, I will send them code text to introduce how does peer works and what kind of things, supplies, health, resources we can provide for them. And some of them choose to believe us and try to access our resources, and some of us maybe think we are like a kind of spam. So it's hard to build the trust with them first. So I think it takes time for us, like for almost 1 year. Like maybe we can have some client just for 12 or 20. It's very hard to have the client in this community. Yeah. And also build trust is very hard.
Well, what have you seen the impact of your work be when you have been able to connect with people? What have you seen? What kind of a difference have you felt like you've been able to make?
I think the most important things is like build the community, because first, as an immigration, like maybe they are social isolated for this society, but we can build the community for them. And for example, like we will organize some event every month for this immigration sex worker, and they can they can join us, and they can make friends and talk about some things with each other, communicate with each other. I think this very meaningful, because these kind of things, what we do, give them some love and also warmth for them when they feel lonely in the new society or new country. Yeah, so I think this is the most important things.
Is there anything that you're aware of that might be kind of driving the change of if there's a growing population of people who aren't speaking English who are doing sex work in Victoria? What might be behind that?
Yeah, so I can speak to that anecdotally, but I don't have actual evidence to support that. So if that's okay, I will say, like, anecdotally, during the pandemic, we definitely noticed an uptick in folks moving from Vancouver, who maybe who are immigrants or migrants and who primarily don't speak English, and doing work. So this is a gap we actually had identified. Probably about 3 or 4 years ago. And we had a couple folks come into our center at Pierce who didn't speak English, and we did our best to support them. But like at that moment, we kind of realized, ooh, we have a gap here. As well, we do partner or work alongside Swan Vancouver in Vancouver. They're a wonderful organization that specifically support immigrant and migrant sex workers of Asian descent. And they actually noticed as well that there were folks moving to Vancouver Island and sort of flagged that for us. And we're helpful in sort of being able to communicate with folks who are wanting to access service, and then they would come in and pick up things from us. And we were sort of working alongside Swan with them being able to utilize their language skills that they have and their ability to connect with this community. And it sort of just made us realize that there is a growing need on Vancouver Island. We are not like Vancouver in the sense that we don't have a bunch of different sex worker organizations that can support different populations. We are the only sex worker organization on Vancouver Island. So we wanted to make sure that we just are minimizing as many barriers as possible to access and trying to support as many folks doing the work on Vancouver Island that we can.
Well, if an organization like yours didn't exist and there was just no one doing that work, what kinds of risks would people be facing, particularly maybe people in this situation who don't necessarily speak English?
I think broadly, if this organization didn't exist, what I will say is that sex workers experience higher rates of violence compared to other demographics. And that's primarily because of stigma and because folks feel like they can target sex workers and that they won't speak out about it. Sex workers are also less likely to disclose or to go to authorities if they do experience violence because of stigma and discrimination. So I think the important work that we do at Peers is decreasing violence and exploitation for sex workers by circulating the bad date and aggressor reporting sheet and using that community-based resource to keep sex workers safe, but then also being able to provide basic needs support such as food, clothing, shelter, etc., to be able to help people perhaps choose less, to not have to choose dates that are maybe going to put them at risk, for example. But also just that community connection. I feel like community is so important in terms of preventing isolation, and that is in itself a huge piece of harm reduction. Isolation can exacerbate as well as cause many different mental illnesses. Being able to keep each other informed and educate one another and create that community connection where people can be honest about a huge part of their life is so important. And I think that also connects with Ray's program. I think that we have a lot of different groups at Peers that specifically look at different intersections. So we have a group for Indigenous sex workers. We have a group for queer masked sex workers. We have a group for trans, non-binary, two-spirit sex workers. And for Ray's program, it is a unique context that immigrant and migrant non-English speaking folks face with sex work. It is a different sort of clientele that they're maybe experiencing. There are different barriers that they're experiencing. So being able to create community connection around that, to be able to discuss those barriers and address them together. And again, community-led decision-making is what sort of defines our organization. So learning from them and being able to lead our programming based on the feedback that we're receiving from them is incredibly important. Not having our organization on the island, I think that there would be a lot of people not accessing service, not accessing medical service, not accessing violence prevention service, and perhaps more folks just falling through the cracks. Because as I've mentioned, we are sometimes the only organization that people see because they're the only ones that they feel safe seeing. And I think that especially for Ray's program is true. A lot of these folks weren't accessing any health or social service supports from a myriad of different reasons. And I'll pass it to Ray actually to follow up on that.
Thank you, Leigh. And I think the risk for my program, speak English program, I think the risk is as Leigh mentioned before, is identity, because most of them, they just have visa. They are not citizen, or they don't get the permanent residence in Canada. So, and also because of their own culture, it's total different things, based on Canadian law and, other countries' law, and they don't know how they can protect them when they meet dangers when they do their business. So I think the Peers is kind of bridge to provide these resources and information for them to let them know how you can protect yourself. They can give me the bad date report, and we will connect. It's like a bridge to connect other resources, and for them they can just be very safe, and they don't worry about use their real name. They can just use their fake name when they access to our resources. And I think that's the risk they have.
You're listening to People First Radio. I'm speaking with Leigh and Ray of Peers Victoria Resources Society, an organization that provides support to sex workers in Victoria. We're talking in part about a program they offer providing outreach support to immigrant and migrant sex workers in the capital region. We're talking about a program that's covering the intersection between people engaging in sex work and people who are maybe of precarious immigration status or don't speak English very well. I'm wondering, for this program is focused on health and like the determinants of health, especially things like housing, things like poverty, things like substance use. Leigh, maybe could you tell me about what you see in your work about the intersection maybe between sex work and some of those other determinants of health, and what do you think people need to know on that topic?
Oh, yes. Well, I think that there's a lot of misunderstandings of sex work in the general public sphere. I think when we look at media, sex work is depicted a certain way. So I think that people think of it as street-based work. They think of it as the most precarious, as people being forced into these types of situations. I will say that sex work is a huge spectrum. We encounter folks who, are only working online, who are only working indoors, and then we encounter the opposite. What I will say is, sex work is a spectrum. The majority of sex workers, I would say, are not actually in that small precarity of work of being street-based and working outside. However, the majority of the folks that we support are. And that's because they're coming to us for those pieces that you mentioned around the social determinants of health. Like, they are looking to meet their basic needs. They are looking for support around housing. And we do see a lot of intersections when it comes to that. I think when you think about mental health, especially, just in the context of what is known as Canada right now, there is, we are living through a toxic drug crisis. We are living through a time where there is a huge rise in folks that are unhoused or precariously housed in this country. So we do see a lot of those intersections. And, in sex work on Vancouver Island as well, we also see a disproportionate amount of those sex workers being Indigenous. So so we do see sort of like the impacts on certain communities we see that in the unhoused community, as well as folks who use substances that we support as well. Like, there is impacts of colonialism that we are seeing on these populations as well. So it's a very complex issue. As I will say again, sex work is a big spectrum of work, and the majority of folks are doing quite well and working indoors, and it's not what you're going to see on TV. However, because of what we do in the organization that we are, and meeting people where they're at physically, and that means going and doing outreach outside, we definitely do encounter folks sitting more at those intersections of, sex work, being unhoused, having mental health challenges, potentially being racialized. And then as well, the one last intersection I will mention is there was a bias for us report done across BC by and for sex workers that highlighted, I believe it was 74% of sex workers that were surveyed for that report identified as having a chronic illness or disability. And that is something that we do see at our organization as well. It is a type of work that folks who are living with a disability are able to do because it's well paying, and they can do it when they are able to work. And when they're not able to work, then perhaps they're stepping back and taking time off for a few weeks. It's also, disability benefits in our country aren't always enough to let people get by. So then perhaps they're doing extra work on the side. But that is a big intersection of the industry as well, is folks living with a disability doing this work.
That Bias for Us survey you mentioned there, released in 2023, widely reported on at the time. And that seems like a really significant finding that I almost think we need to pause on, that 74% of people who filled that out reported that they identified as having a chronic illness or disability. What do you think we should take away from that and do with that information?
That's a really good question, Joe. I think that there's multiple things to take away from that. I think that, first of all, I think there's a big movement around empowerment of bodies and and that being aligned with sex work as well. I think like sex positivity, body positivity. But I think that in a capitalist society, we have this ableist mindset that is also driven by this idea of labor. And then so when we think of sex worker rights, which are tied to labor rights, we're also thinking about what's inherent to that is the idea of the body being able to contribute to labor in order to be a valuable resource in today's capitalist society. And I think that there's a lot of pushback about that in these political areas around disability justice. And I think that's really interesting when it intersects with sex work, of like being able to own your body and own your identity, and be able to work outside the system to be able to provide for yourself, and an act of resilience in doing that. I also think it's a commentary on our social service support networks within our country, in the sense that what folks are receiving for their disability benefit is not enough. It's not enough to get by, especially when you consider higher costs of living, especially in this province. It just often is not enough for folks. And in order to be able to get by, and in order to be able to put food on the table, they need to do something extra, and they're limited to what they can do. And I think this can be a really great avenue for people who are limited to what they can do, to be able to choose to make to work a couple days a month if that's all they have capacity for, and that provides just enough income for what they need. I don't want to speak too much on it, because I think that I am not someone who is impacted by living with a disability, and or as negatively impacted as others might be. Like I'm still have a full-time position, so I think it's them that should be speaking to perhaps like like what this intersection really looks like, and what we should be taking away from it. But those would be some like initial thoughts that I would have.
Well, if we're talking about just general health for people engaging in sex work, and maybe as well the specific population that Ray you're working with, what parts of the situation do you both feel could be improved through more open public dialogue or further public awareness of some of these issues?
I think that there's a lot of things that could be improved. Public awareness and public education is something that we definitely try to do at Peers Victoria, and I think there's always more that we can do. Something that we're always trying to make people aware of, especially right now, is the harms of the current laws on sex workers. And so, for example, like being involved in that constitutional challenge, letting people know that people think, like even the title, the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act, makes it seem like this is an act and a set of laws that are going to protect people. Letting people be aware that actually these laws are quite harmful and contributing to increased violence and exploitation. So that's one. Two, I would say probably the thing I encounter the most in my line of work is the conflation between human trafficking and sex work. And I think that is very pertinent to Ray's program as well. When we think about immigrant and migrant sex workers, like this Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, which we mentioned, like these sex work prohibitions for folks that are coming here on a visa is to prevent them from being trafficked, right? Or that's what they're stating. But actually they can be quite ineffective and actually prevent people who are experiencing exploitation from seeking help, because they then fear deportation. So I think that as well in the general public, a lot of people think like sex workers are forced into this, that's a very precarious position, that it's inherently exploitative, and that all sex work is either trafficking or is likely to be exploitative. And what I just would say to those people is that sex work is not inherently exploitative. Exploitation can exist in the industry. That's only when you have precarious working conditions or laws that perhaps make the public think that sex work is something that is like dirty, or it exists in this gray area, or in the shadows, so perpetrators can come out and exploit people. Just like any job, exploitation can exist if you don't have proper and safe working conditions. So I would say that there is a big difference between human trafficking and sex work. And just because exploitation can exist in sex work, just like it can exist in any other job like serving or truck driving or whatever, it doesn't mean that the job itself is exploitative, and that we just have to work together to ensure that sex workers have access to safety and have access to resources, and that they have laws that protect them and not laws that prevent them from seeking help if they need it. And can you repeat the question? Because I feel like I only answered part of that.
Yeah, really just when it comes to looking at the intersections between sex work and health, like what parts of the situation could be improved through further public awareness, or like it feels like there's a real taboo about even just talking about sex work out in the open on the FM radio. So what is the way to do that in a way that is going to have a net positive impact on society, whether that's the people who engage in sex work or the people who don't engage in sex work, but maybe they vote for people who make laws that regulate sex work?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think a good starting point, I will often have conversations with people who are like, oh, like, I just don't know how I feel about it. There seems to be a lot of moral panic around sex work, or people have a lot of moral attachments to the idea of sex work. And I think a good way to first broach it is by looking at like, well, do you not think that sex workers deserve rights? And kind of turning it away from the idea of whether or not it's morally okay to like engage in sex work, to if they're going to engage in it, do you not think that they should be doing it in safe working conditions? Do you not think that they should have rights? If you're worried about them, then like let's provide them with the resources that they need. It's just really interesting because it is, one of these it is a type of work that people have a lot of feelings about. Sex is something I think in our society that people don't like to talk about, or that they have they have shame about, or they have particular feelings about, and that can be cultural, that could have religious influences, that can be based in personal experience, or whatever it might be. But I think that we live in a society where sex is something that we don't talk about publicly generally. So then when you intersect that with work, it becomes that much more taboo. So I think the easiest, and I think there's a long way we can come in terms of a society, in terms of being open about that and whatever that may look like. But when you're thinking about social determinants of health, when you're thinking about health services, it's kind of the same as like harm reduction or substance use. You may not do substances yourself. You may not have an interest in drug use, but do we all agree that these people deserve to live? Do we all agree these people deserve to have rights and access to healthcare and supports? Yes, like I think that that's a pretty simple place to start, and it's a rights-based place to start. Do these people have a right to exist? Do they have a right to have access to laws and workplace safety measures?
Leigh, Ray, thank you very much for taking the time. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me about it.
Thank you so much for having us.
Leigh and Ray are involved with Peers Victoria Resources Society, an organization supporting sex workers in the Capital Region. We were talking in part about a program they offer which gives support to migrant and immigrant sex workers in Victoria.
People First Radio, People First Media, and People First Stories are community media projects of Vancouver Island Mental Health Society and are produced in Nanaimo, British Columbia. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of Vancouver Island Mental Health Society or its broadcast, podcast, and social media partners.